Welcome, everybody, to the first ever TBD Motorsports podcast. I'm John Ross, here with my co-hosts Scott Seaman and Mike Dullard, and yes, those are their real names. Mike, why don't you go first, introduce yourself, and a little bit of what your background in racing is and that kind of thing.
Well, as John said, I'm Mike. My background in racing, Christ, I've been at dirt track since I was 6 years old, um, working on cars. Uh, well, I use working loosely. Um, I did a stint in IMCA dirt modifieds for a couple years, and then got out of it for family reasons, and just never really got back into it. But I never really lost my love for the dirt world. I just I think just the insight that John and Scott and I have are definitely going to be entertaining. We have differing opinions on many things, so stay tuned.
Scott, how about you?
Yeah, I've been around racing my entire life. I grew up going to the dirt track, and it was something that just was in my blood, and I've always loved. And um, finally got to the point where I could afford, and I use that term loosely, to buy my first race car, and kind of did my own thing with that for about 6 years, and did some figure eights, done some cruisers, ran a truck, ran a stock car, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Good deal. So, different from these two, I didn't grow up around racing my whole life. I actually started racing in karts about 5 years ago and did a couple seasons in that. Ran a couple years doing what they call an E-mod around here, which is basically like an unsanctioned sport mod kind of thing. And hopefully, if this racing season ever happens, we'll be running a B-mod this year. But the one thing we all have in common is we're all part of the TBD Motorsports iRacing team, which we've been doing for, man, how long have we been running this team for? Like 3 years now.
Yeah, it's been pretty close to that, 3 4 years.
It's actually been almost exactly 3 years.
Nice. Well, there you go. This can be our 3 year anniversary show. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you guys actually? So we have another teammate named Chris Watkins who may his iRacing career rest in peace. But he, if I'm remembering correctly, actually started racing with you guys on R Factor,
That is correct.
and then brought you over to the dark side, so to speak.
I was actually on iRacing before I got to R Factor, but iRacing did not have dirt at the time, so R Factor craved my dirt hunger, and then we just kind of went from there.
Yeah, back in the dark old days before iRacing came around to the whole dirt track thing.
I tried R Factor one time on a bootleg copy that Watkins sent me, and I think the Federales caught on, and it would never let me race.
Yeah, well, they gotta have something to do, right? Busting
I,
people playing a game that can be bought for like $8 for free.
yep,
Because that was the original R Factor, right? Not the R Factor 2.
Correct.
yeah.
Well, anyway, basically the point of this podcast is A, to give us all something to do on a Monday evening, and B, to kind of recap the week in racing or sim racing, which, as we all know, that's basically all that's going on right now. That's one thing we're going to try to avoid talking about too much, since you've all heard from every news source and every social media source all about the pandemic that's going on. Uh, it's going to be hard to completely avoid talking about it, since it is the major thing that's going on in current events, but we're going to try to stay more positive and focused on the racing stuff.
We're a COVID-free environment as much as possible.
Yep. Got our hand sanitizer and face masks and whatever
Yeah.
Wait,
else.
you guys never told me I needed that stuff.
Ah,
It's
shit.
a no Rona zone.
We're screwed. Mike, you've doomed us all. Well, with that in mind, I guess really the only thing in motorsports news to talk about this week is the NASCAR Pro Invitational Series and some of the other, pro sim racing series that have been going on. I personally actually didn't watch it on Sunday. I went fishing instead, but I know you guys did. So maybe you can offer some insight or your take on how you think that went and how you think that's developing.
Overall, I think NASCAR taking over the esports world is a positive, not only for NASCAR but for iRacing in general and any esports for that matter. They're putting it on a very large platform. I mean, there's people that probably have never heard of this before tuning in to watch these guys race. Um, this week at Bristol, however, I have a feeling it probably turned a lot of people off of it. I mean, the racing was a joke.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I mean, even the best quote unquote, sim racers have struggled at Bristol. Just it's a tough track, and the quirks of a sim don't really make it any easier. So you get these guys that are used to having that real feedback from a real car and slap them on the sim, short race, high intensity. I could definitely see where that could turn into a caution fest, much like our NIS experience did.
Yeah, I mean, I actually saw quite a few positive comments about it. I think everybody was kind of expecting it to be what it was, which was a wreck fest. You can't pass around the bottom, so everybody's fighting for the top, and they actually give the cars back a little horsepower. So if you don't come off the corner just right, you can get a little squirrely, and guys weren't clear, and I think there's guys that didn't like each other from real life racing, so that made it more exciting.
For sure. Yeah, so from what I hear, there was quite a few squabbles going on, and also, it kind of brings up an interesting point as to how seriously should the drivers be taking this sim racing thing. We heard about Bubba Wallace having sponsor issues due to rage quitting, allegedly, from the Pro Invitational race. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that? Is it better for them to take this seriously and treat it like a real race, or would it be better for everybody if they just kind of had fun with it?
I think there's a fine line they have to walk with this. I mean, they are doing it for the sheer entertainment of the NASCAR fans. However, they also have to look at it this way. They're carrying sponsors that have sold out millions, if not tens of millions of dollars to be on the side of this car. And so you have to act as though you're on the racetrack. And that's what I think Bubba Wallace got in trouble with this week is, if he went out there in an RPM car and did what he did, oh, my car is junk, I fucking quit. Yeah, sponsors are going to pull out from that. They don't want somebody that's going to say that. They don't want somebody that's going to have that kind of attitude. You have to portray yourself as you're on the track and you're representing these sponsors and these teams. And it's just not a good look if you're going to go out there and treat it like it's a video game. I mean, they're doing this to appease the sponsors that have made the commitments to them.
Well, I don't know. Part of me wonders if, like, obviously every business in the nation's hurting, except for grocery stores. But so part of me is like, well, maybe they were looking for a way out anyway. But then I heard that they had just signed a contract to partner with NASCAR itself. So I'm not, who knows on that deal. But
Well, that's
yeah,
actually, I mean, that could actually go towards your original argument because we've seen in the past NASCAR has been really bad about essentially poaching sponsorship from their own teams. With the whole NASCAR official partners program. Why spend, 10 million bucks or whatever to sponsor one team when you can spend less money and get mentioned on every broadcast as the official, such and such of NASCAR?
yeah, That's a good point. So, I don't know. I think that they said during the broadcast that he had already used both of his fast repairs, which it drives me nuts that they don't call it fast repair on TV. It's like, no,
What do
that
they call it? Like
They call
resets?
it resets.
Yeah.
resets, yeah.
Well, I mean, they're not wrong because that's technically what it is, but
Right.
I know, but
and
it's
maybe
not
that
what it's
makes
called in game.
yeah, but maybe that makes more sense to somebody that's not familiar with iRacing. I don't know.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a fine line they have to walk. I personally lean more towards the idea of, let's take advantage in every way that we can of the differences between sim racing and real racing when we're doing these broadcasts. I think it's super cool that they have, Clint Boyer getting interviewed while he's driving and all that good stuff. Being able to take it a little bit easier and less serious.
I think it's extremely distracting for him, though.
Yeah, but
I
I mean,
mean, we're all competitive and we're nobodies. So
Hey,
he's
listen
compet,
here.
but it's got to kind of drive him nuts just a little bit to not be able to fully concentrate sometimes. Because I've heard him a couple of times, like you could tell he doesn't know what the hell he's doing because he's trying to talk to somebody and try to pay attention to what he's got going on in the race too.
Well, if you were watching the race, you saw that when Jeff Gordon was talking to Jimmy Johnson, that he lost focus just long enough to run through his pit stall.
so,
I didn't see that.
so next
Jimmy,
time I
Jimmy
run through
flew
my
through
pit
his
stall while we're shooting the shit on TeamSpeak, I'm blaming you guys. That's what I'm taking away from this conversation.
Well, I can validate that because there's been numerous times I'll be bullshitting with you guys while we're in a race and I just completely miss a mark or something. Um, it is distracting.
Yeah, it's like when people just won't ever shut up when you're actually racing, and
Right.
that's why I set up a mute button now so I can just mute everybody.
Yeah, way ahead of you on that one. I've been muting everybody for, man, probably the last 2 years. Basically ever since I stopped actually talking to teammates through the in-race chat, and we went over to TeamSpeak exclusively. That I don't know. You get too many random people just saying stupid crap in the chat. Sometimes it's funny, you'll get guys quoting King of the Hill or whatever, but
But anyway, back to topic. I mean, I feel like this shouldn't be taken too seriously, but at the same time, I mean, if you're going to put your sponsor out there on the side of your car, this is all NASCAR has right now. That's all their sponsors are getting is this sort of publicity, this televised esports. And so, if you're going to have them on the side of the car, you've got to represent. And that's where Bubba Wallace made a mistake.
yeah, I mean, it's the unfortunate kind of double-edged sword of having funding from corporate sponsors. It's the same thing we talk about all the time in real NASCAR, where we feel like, yeah, it's great to have the sponsors bringing in the dollars and allowing the racing to happen, but when you look at the personalities of the drivers and how they're forced to act in front of the camera versus what their true personality might be, there's kind of that whole corporate robot effect that you get where guys can't speak their mind or say and do the things that they want to do on the track because they're afraid of offending the sponsors. So it's kind of surprising, but not really surprising in a way, I guess, that trickled over into the sim racing world so quickly.
If you ask me, ever since he's came into the sport, I'm not trying to bag on him or anything, but Bubba Wallace he's been trying to break that barrier, and I think there's times he gets too carried away in trying to show everybody that, hey, I don't care what the sponsors think, la da da da, and I think it's going to end up biting him in the ass more than it has already.
Yeah, especially considering that he hasn't been in a position to really prove himself as a driver at the cup level yet. I think there's definitely some guys out there that are more outspoken than others. You get guys like Kevin Harvick or Brad Keselowski that can really say things that are against the establishment and stuff and get away with it. But at the same time, both of those guys are cup champions with, tens of wins to their name. Bubba Wallace doesn't really have that clout, so that's really all he has is sponsor appeal.
Right, and I don't think he has a lot of that. Um, I just the only thing he's got going for him, and I don't mean this as it's going to sound, but the only thing he's got going for him is his diversity. It's kind of like the whole Danica Patrick thing.
Yeah, I mean you're not necessarily wrong in that sense in terms of the marketability aspect. Then that's one of the reasons why I thought that he would do better with the sponsors than he has. Because I mean it's a known thing in racing. If you have a hook, whether that be a specific background, you know a racial background that's unique to the sport, or whether you come from a different socioeconomic or whatever background, if you have a cool story behind you of how you got into racing that the sponsors can sell, that's something that they can use to market you, and that's what it's all about, is the marketing from the sponsor's perspective, obviously. So I really thought that he would do better than he has. And I mean, let's be honest though, they have done a pretty good job of bringing in sponsors to RPM, considering the fact that as a team they basically suck.
Yeah, I mean they're down there with the low budget teams, the satellite teams. That's essentially what they are. Um, they're a very well known team that doesn't perform.
All right, so moving on to some of the other races that happened over the weekend. Did any of you guys catch any of the other sim races that were going on, whether it be the IndyCar or World of Outlaws or Formula One, anything like that?
I did not. I heard a little bit about they had the sprint cars and the late models. It sounds like Christopher Bell picked up where he left off in the real world and put a whooping on those sprint car boys.
I heard actually it was really fun to watch. I didn't watch it, but I'm gonna try and watch it. Is it Wednesday night, I think?
It is Wednesday nights. That is correct.
Yeah, might have to record that one. Is
Yep,
that on
it's on.
iRacing as well?
Yeah, Fox Sports 1
Gotcha.
is showing it. But yeah, I watched the Indy race, and I thought it was really good. It was good racing. They had to use strategy. They had good tire fall off, which I thought was good.
Who ended up winning that one?
I can't remember his name. He's kind of a newer kid. I don't think he's actually officially raced in the Indy Series.
Well,
But
I,
he's
well, I know 2 weeks ago it was Sage Karam dominated at Watkins Glen.
yeah, and he dominated this race too, but they all had to pit for fuel. And he pitted he was one of the last ones to pit, and he was coming up through the field, but he was using people up to get there, and then he tried to use somebody else up and ended up wrecking himself.
So that sounds about consistent with how he drove when he was actually in the series full time.
Yeah, and he was just on iRacing Flea Market the other day looking for a sim setup for Tony Kanaan.
Oh, nice. Well, speaking of the sim setups those guys are running, I thought it was pretty cool to see the setup with hand controls now that Robert Wickens has. I mean, obviously,
Did you actually see it?
yeah. Well, I did. I didn't watch the race, but I watched. He had. I don't remember what social media it was on because I just saw it on Reddit. But he did an overview of his setup, showing the hand controls for the brakes and all that cool stuff. I mean, it sucks that he was injured the way that he was and all that, but it's awesome that he's able to get back to driving in some capacity.
Yeah, I agree. I'm
That,
hoping. I mean, you never know. Miracles can happen.
yeah, I mean, you look at guys like Alex Zanardi was able to come back and actually do some real professional racing despite being partially paralyzed. I think if I understand it correctly, I don't want to try to qualify these injuries because I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff by any means, but I'm pretty sure his paralysis was actually worse in some ways than Wickens was. He was able to race GT cars and the DTM BMW there in a couple races. So
Didn't he run a Daytona prototype too?
I think not that I know of. I know he ran at Daytona, but I think he was in one of the GTLM BMWs.
Maybe I was thinking of Emerson Fittipaldi.
Could be. I mean, similar names. I don't think he had any.
No, he's just old.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, speaking of Emerson, I actually did watch one sim racing event over the weekend. It was like a Race of Champions deal on R Factor, and they had several different divisions basically, and one of the divisions that they had was like the Legends division where they had Emerson Fittipaldi was in it. Uh, Juan Pablo Montoya was in it. A bunch of old Formula One guys. Dario Franchitti was in it. So that was
On R Factor?
yeah.
Wow.
They
Good
were
old Dario.
they were running. It was like a vintage. I want to say it was like an early late '70s or early '80s Formula One car. So it was interesting seeing the gap between there. Definitely some of the older guys were struggling to come to terms with the whole simulator thing.
I think that's been a struggle for not only, the legend guys, but also the guys that race currently. I think they're struggling with the whole simulator thing. I mean, let's talk about a difference between a simulator and the real thing. I mean, we've all been there.
I mean, that's a good point. We've all been on both sides of that in some at least fairly similar vehicles. So
Um, in my opinion, this is probably the realest you're going to get without actually sitting your butt in a seat. But like a lot of these guys have said, there's things you can't tell when you're sitting in the simulator versus when you're in a real car. Um, you just get that feeling in the seat. You know what the car is going to do next, or you know what the car needs. Those are things you just can't get on the simulator because you don't have that feeling. Everybody talks about immersion in this simulator. You're never going to get full immersion, whether you've got a motion rig, whether you've got VR. You're just never going to have it. And these guys they're chasing pipe dreams with these 10, 15, 20, $30,000 setup.
well, have you ever actually tried a full motion setup, or especially with VR, that kind of thing?
I've tried a full motion setup. It wasn't to the extent of what you saw Denny Hamlin driving in, but it was too. I don't it wasn't smooth. The transitions, they just didn't do it for me. Um, I don't know.
Too much
But
like an arcade, like one of those arcade things where the roller coaster simulator that throws you around, just trying too hard to make it seem real when there's no way basically.
yeah, it was jerky. Don't get me wrong. The people that put the money into these things, into building them and making them available to others, I mean, I applaud you in your efforts. But you're never going to get that sensation. When you're behind the wheel of an actual car, you can feel when the back end's starting to step out. You can feel when the right front starts to lose grip. Those are just things you can really feel, and you can have your force feedback turned up. You can do whatever you want to do in the simulator, and you're just not going to get that stuff. You can hear different little ticks of the car. When you're sitting behind the wheel,
Oh yeah,
you start to become one with it.
yeah. I tend to agree with you. I think in some ways the sim is easier because there can be a little bit of sensory overload going on when you're doing something as crazy as driving a race car. All of your, you know, touch, smell, I mean even taste. You can all of your senses are active in doing it, and that can help, like you said, make you one with the car. But it can also be a lot to take in, especially for a newbie. So in some ways, the sim is a little less overwhelming, but for guys that started doing the real thing first, I could definitely see where you could become dependent on some of those other inputs, and especially the seat of the pants, and also the inner ear plays into that a lot. Your sense of balance and rotation and stuff. So yeah, you're right. It's not the same. There's
Well,
there's pros and
eh,
cons of both.
from everything I've heard with the as far as motion goes, it's less is more. It's just minimal motion that you really need to get the full immersion.
Well, yeah, because you can't realistically simulate, several G's of deceleration. I mean,
No.
unless you're sitting in some kind of rocket chair or something. The
Yeah.
most you could ever, a lot of them work by basically tilting you side to side, so you're essentially using the gravity of the Earth to generate the G's, so to speak. But the most you could ever generate by tilting you 90 degrees one way or another is 1G. And we all know that race cars are capable of pulling a lot more than that in any given direction generally.
Even without motion, there's always 1G sitting in my sim.
Well, yeah, unless you're on Mars or in orbit.
I think I'm looking to get a butt kicker here soon. I think that would help the most.
If we don't simmer down on this bullshit, I'm going to get a butt kicking too.
But yeah, that's there's ways like that of improving the immersion for sure.
I just feel like some guys they're shooting for the stars when really they're just going to barely break the clouds. Um, you know, everybody talks about immersion, and I think there's just, I mean, eventually you just get to the point to where you're burning money. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
it's not going to get any better.
I'm still running the same G27 setup, Logitech wheel, generic gear-driven, not really all that great setup that I've had since I started on this sim racing thing. And I've said it time and time again, if I have a lot of money to spend, I'm gonna spend it on something I can actually drive. I love sim racing, but yeah, I do think that people get carried away with it, spending too much money on it. When, I mean, let's be real, for what a lot of these guys spend on their sim rigs, you could buy at least a nice go kart, if not, a full blown race car. So, I mean, sure, there's more limitations on when and how you can use a real racing vehicle versus your sim that you can use whenever you want. But
I think the reason so many people get into sim racing versus the real racing thing and spending that kind of money is, you know, each weekend you don't have to worry about buying a set of tires. You don't have to worry about buying fuel. You don't have to worry about straightening sheet metal. You don't have to spend hours out in your garage, um, fixing the car, which some of us enjoy doing that kind of stuff. Some people don't. They enjoy the competition and the camaraderie that comes along with it. And I use camaraderie loosely because 9 times out of 10 you don't run into friendly people.
yeah, not
But
everybody's as nice as we are, right?
right. And
We're nice.
yeah, I was just gonna say we use that term loosely with John Ross. Um, but these guys, they don't have to worry about the painstaking, the broken knuckles, the blood, the sweat, the tears that come along with a real race car.
Yeah,
And so I think that's a lot of the
Well, that and you can do it during the winter.
yeah, and that's like what John was saying. I mean, there's really no limitations as to when you can do this. If it's wintertime, if it's summertime, if you've got a broken race car, if
if
you've
there's a
got
global pandemic
coronavirus,
going on.
right? You can still jump in your sim rig and go racing. So I think that's what draws people to it more than anything. And you can get into it for, let's say $1,000, and that's the entire setup: computer, wheels, pedals, a monitor. You can get into it for $1,000. You can't get into a real race car for that kind of money.
No.
You could buy a set of tires.
You can
And
get yourself an outlaw front wheel drive.
Or yeah, regular front wheel drive. Yeah, I guess that pretty much wraps up that rabbit hole.
yeah, we could go so deep into this, we'd just get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a whole lot else to talk about as far as goings on in the racing world. Hopefully, once things resume normal, we can do breakdowns of how the week's racing went. Once I'm out on the track again, I plan on kind of giving you guys a weekly recap of how my racing's gone, and we can always recap our iRacing stuff too. Once obviously last week the NIS was just such a shit show at Bristol that there really isn't much to talk about.
Yeah, we wrecked some more.
besides the fact that I did significantly better drunk than I did sober.
Don't tell everybody your secret. Now everybody's gonna be drunk.
Well, the way most people were driving, it wouldn't have surprised me. I think that was just luck more than anything.
Yeah, eventually we'll get back to some normalcy.
All right, well, for the time being, though, I have an idea for a little segment we're going to do here. I'm going to call it the Random Racing Reference Roulette segment. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the random page button on Racing Reference. For those of you who aren't familiar with the site, kind of a plug here, I guess, for someone that by no means is giving us any money but still deserves your attention. It's basically a conglomeration of every racing statistic for every major series that you could possibly think of. So when I click random page, it's going to bring up, could be a race, could be a driver, could be anything that's happened since the recorded history of motorsports began. And then we'll have to talk about it. So we did not rehearse this ahead of time, and no one knows what it's going to be. Let's find out. Oh boy, we have the 2012 Singapore Grand Prix. So, Mike, Scott, I'm the only one that's got this on my monitor currently, so I've got all the information in front of me. Who do you guys think won that race, or do you remember it?
2012 in Singapore.
I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton.
That was going to be my guess, but since you took that, I am going to go ahead and go with Kimi Räikkönen.
You guys would both be wrong on those accounts. It looks like the winner in his Red Bull at the time was Sebastian Vettel.
That was
Damn it,
going to
that
be
was
my
my
second.
next guess.
Yeah.
Yep, that was right sort of on the tail end of Red Bull's reign of terror, so to speak. Similar to kind of how Mercedes is dominating the F1 world right now.
Right.
Interestingly, that was when one of the last seasons, if not the last season, that Lewis Hamilton was driving for McLaren. And he finished dead last after only completing 22 laps with gearbox failure.
What a loser.
Yeah, that was when Mercedes was kind of just starting up, and they actually had Michael Schumacher had come out of retirement and was racing for them. And he also retired from the race, but with a crash. And the podium was rounded out by Jenson Button and everybody's favorite Fernando Alonso. So you guys don't really follow Formula One a whole lot, do you?
No, their engines get on my nerves.
Yeah, of course, that was back. That was, I'll admit I am not a Formula One expert, but I do know that was before they went to the hybrids. So
Yeah, I think 2012 they might have still been in the V10s, or they had just switched to the V8s.
yeah, but they definitely hadn't gone to the hybrid.
No.
Hybrid weed whackers.
No, I mean, I'm not a big fan of how they sound now, but Formula One cars are just such a innovative. It's crazy, the technology in those things.
Yeah,
What's crazy about it is the money in those things.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the payrolls and the expenses and what those cars bring in compared to let's say NASCAR, I mean it's 10 times. It's insane, and I that's something I've never understood about Formula One, how it can draw in so much money versus NASCAR or IndyCar. I get it. It's international. Okay, so I mean the possibilities are endless, but it's not just
It's a lot more people. That's the thing. We're one country that loves NASCAR of what, 5 billion or 6 billion people.
but we're not the only country that loves NASCAR. I mean, there's other countries that follow NASCAR. Do they follow it as much as Americans? No, because
Yeah,
they probably don't have rednecks in Spain.
I'm sure they do. They probably just sound a little different.
Right. And they probably don't have sex with their siblings.
Well,
But I mean, that's I never did quite understand that, and all of this factory backed stuff. You don't.
Well, well, part of it is because they use, well, first of all, let's look at the manufacturers. It's not your everyday Ford, Chevy, Toyota. It's all the high-end car manufacturers, right?
yeah, that's a good point.
So, like Mercedes, and if anybody's watched Formula One the season or whatever on Netflix, it kind of sheds light on that. So, a lot of the
I
technologies that they put into these cars are technologies that they're putting into cars that they're selling on an assembly line, or they're hand built or whatever they are, but they're manufacturing these cars, and a
Yeah,
lot of that technology draws from the racing.
I
yeah.
did actually watch that Formula One this season. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things on that side of the pond. I enjoyed it. Um, I was captivated at how that works, and just even just the way that the driver contracts work, how basically you can be in or out in a matter of 4 races.
Yeah, I think Lewis Hamilton's worth like what, almost $400 million.
I haven't.
Yeah, suck it, Jimmy Johnson.
I have no idea, but it
I'm
wouldn't.
pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it's well over 300 million he's worth.
Yeah. One thing I find interesting looking at this race from 2012 is if you look at the top six positions, you have Red Bull, you have Mercedes, you have Ferrari, Force India, or actually that's not. So it's Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Force India, Mercedes, Lotus. You got six different teams in the top six, whereas now you still have some of those same teams up front, with it being basically Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, but it's a rare race that those three teams don't lock out the top six.
Yep. I
So,
actually want to circle back to the Indy cars for a second,
uh-huh.
because I was going to tell you guys about this earlier, but we we moved on. I was watching the California race today. They from like, I think it was 2015, and they interviewed all the drivers after the race like they normally do, and it was crazy how every single one of them was basically saying that they didn't feel safe to be in the car. It was right after James Hinchcliffe's bad accident, and it's just looking at, so if you remember in 2015, that's when they had the basically the back bumpers on the Indy cars.
Yep.
They looked really stupid, and they were going for super high downforce because they wanted more pack style racing, and that's when the really bad accidents were happening. And it's you look at them today, and they've been taking more and more downforce away from them, but they don't, like Juan Pablo Montoya and uh what's his name that drives the Verizon car,
Willpower.
Willpower.
Will Power. He went on for like 5 minutes about how unsafe it is, and he goes, I'm sure it's great if you're a fan, he goes, but I don't even know why I go out there. He's like, every race I should just tell my family goodbye because I don't. There's a good chance I might not see him again.
I mean, that's a little over dramatic, don't you think? I mean, yeah, there were people that died in IndyCar around about that time. Dan
Well,
Weldon and
I think he was alluring to the fact that
Justin Wilson.
they couldn't get away from each other, and the only way that you could pass anybody was to make really risky moves that was going to cause an accident, which is exactly what happened at the end of the race.
And I to get back to what John was saying, over dramatic. It may have been over dramatic, but about the time you lose that fear of something like that happening, that is the time you should hang it up. That should always be in the back of your mind, just for the simple fact that that's what keeps you grounded. You're not invincible in that car. I don't care what car you're in. I don't care what style of racing. You're not invincible. Um,
Well, and they were losing
so
a lot. They were losing friends.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you strap into that car knowing that the week prior, your buddy Dan died doing exactly what you're buckling in to do. Um, if you don't have that worry in the back of your mind, there is something wrong with you, and there is no reason for you to be behind that wheel of that car.
Well, and not only that, but they're out there to race. And it's basically, Daytona and Talladega on every oval track that they went to.
Yeah, at that
Right.
time.
And they were wanting it to be more about the driver and the car and the setup than hold it to the floor and see who can hang on till the end.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
and
So
that
I'm of two minds of that because I absolutely agree with that. I hate the direction that NASCAR has gone, trying to make the races more like pack races, and I applaud the direction that IndyCar has gone in terms of taking downforce away, making the drivers actually drive. I think I would rather see a race with 10 good passes where it was really the driver making a badass move versus a race where at the end of every long straightaway the lead changes because of the draft. Like that's not
Yeah, and to put that into perspective, that California race had almost 80 passes for the lead.
right. So I agree with that aspect of it, but unfortunately, I mean, you look at IndyCar then versus IndyCar now versus IndyCar 5 years before that, the number of oval races that they go to has just been declining and declining and declining, and a lot of it has to do with concerns about driver safety.
Yeah, which is
Um,
why they got that new Halo windshield system. And
yep.
but
So
if
it's a
you look at
fighter
their
jet.
racing, like last year, I watched almost every race last year because the racing has gotten better. I really enjoyed the races last year.
yeah, for sure. I
I
guess
think NASCAR needs to take a cue from IndyCar
Well, you know
and
what?
put it back in the driver's hands.
NASCAR did take a cue from them because if you also look at Indy cars, they've been taking power away from those cars as well.
well they almost didn't have a choice when they took the downforce away because they're already at the limit of what can be even remotely construed as safe on the big ovals. They actually
Yeah, I mean,
gave
when
them
you're talking
they actually gave them
220,
horsepower
230
back on
horse.
the road courses, but on the big ovals they had to take it away when they took that downforce away, or they'd be doing 250 miles an hour off into the corner at Indy.
Mike,
And
have you ever been to an Indy race here?
I have not. Like I said, the sound just gives me a headache. It sends me into a whirlwind, and I have flashbacks.
I went to the very first race here, and
talking
I
about
went
it
to
at Iowa for people
Iowa
that don't know where
Speedway.
you guys are
Yep.
from.
Yep.
Yeah, Scott and I are from Iowa. John's from Arkansas, but
Well, I'm
his
not from
sister broke up with
Arkansas.
him, so he moved to Missouri.
I'm
She's a
actually from
bitch.
Missouri, but I lived in Arkansas. I was probably living in Arkansas when I met you, or virtually met you guys, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, anyway, um, I specifically remember that race. I had like front row seats, and Danica Patrick, they went three wide at the start finish line, and it was very overcast, and there was a lot of moisture in the air, and you could see the contrail coming off the wings and stuff. So it was kind of cool, but they went three wide, and she was in the middle, and you could see the air what it was doing to her car, and it basically the best way to describe it was like it looked like God took a hold of her car and just started shaking it side to side uncontrollably, and she lost it. There was nothing she could do, and
Should just take the wheel.
she wrecked half the field. But I mean, there was nothing she could do. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. The car just went nuts, and it was all because of the air.
Do you think that's what happened in every NASCAR race she was ever in?
The
More than likely
the
not.
god started shaking the car side to side until she couldn't control it anymore.
Yeah,
He was gassy that day.
that's what it looked like.
I mean, if some
Hey, she
divine
did okay
power
on road courses.
if some divine power like seized control of my car, I guess I'd let go of the steering wheel before I hit the wall too. What were we talking about?
Something about rabbit holes and Danica Patrick.
No,
This train's gone off the tracks.
well, we were talking a little bit about driver safety and how it pertains to IndyCar versus different styles of racing and all that stuff.
Yeah, I just like Scott said, or I think it was John actually. At some point, you've got to stop the speed. Um, it becomes unsafe at a certain point, and I think IndyCar they're teetering on that edge, and taking power away was the only option they had because the technology in their handling department has gained leaps and bounds. Downforce and suspension packages and everything. NASCAR is the same way, but you're driving a giant brick. Um, so obviously the speeds aren't going to be there like they are with IndyCar. I don't think taking power away from the Cup cars was the right idea. It takes more out of the driver's hands. If you look back at actually the broadcast for the Bristol race, Jeff Gordon was looking back at some races he had with Rusty Wallace and so on and such forth. And those guys, they had to wheel those cars. They weren't planted to the track. They weren't in the track. They were on top of it. Um, and that's the kind of racing people want to see. Not the car's in the track, we just floor it and hopefully we can make a pass somewhere. We make room somewhere. It's not what I'm looking for anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you for sure there, but I think really the interesting take away from this entire kind of tangent and kind of going back to what Will Power was saying about not feeling safe in the car. At some point, invincibility, and like you said, Mike, nobody's invincible, but at some point it became the norm for the feeling invincible became the norm. You know what I mean? Like Will got upset, and a lot of the drivers were upset because they didn't feel invincible in those cars. But I would argue that that's actually a good thing, that for drivers to not feel invincible and to recognize that what they're doing is dangerous. Like you look at Ryan Newman's crash. I mean, it's weird. It feels like it happened in a different year and a different time or life because of everything that's been happening lately. But that was only, a couple months ago that we didn't know if he was alive or dead after that horrible wreck at Daytona. And that shocked everybody, but it really shouldn't have, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, it's crazy that we go as long as we do without bad accidents, and we get lulled into a sense of false security. They interviewed, and I'm not gonna shit on Corey LaJoie here because most drivers, especially in his situation, trying to get a good finish for an underfunded team, would have done the same thing. But when he sees a massive wreck happening in front of him coming to the checkers, and he doesn't lift, and he plows into Newman's car full throttle, the only reason you do that is because you feel invincible. And you are until you aren't. You know what I mean?
Right. But that's what I'm saying is these guys, they don't have, they go out onto the track forgetting about that fear. And for the reason that you said, John, we go so long without an accident like Ryan Newman's or Dale Earnhardt's or something like that. We go so long in the stock car side of it where we just become blind to it. We become oblivious to the fact that what they're doing is still extremely dangerous. And even in something as small as your local dirt track, it's still there.
Absolutely. And I see that all the time. I've had to deal with competitors and drivers that drive like they can't get hurt. You know what I mean? I mean, for someone like me that is on a fairly small budget when it comes to my racing operation, I'm constantly thinking about protecting my equipment, but I'm also thinking about, protecting myself.
And you're still wet behind the ears when it comes to this, John.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and to know that you've got to sit there and think about that kind of stuff, that tells me that you've got a pretty good head on your shoulders.
Well, I appreciate it. But
he's definitely got a good mustache on his shoulders.
Oh, no, I had to shave it. You can't wear a mask with a mustache. It doesn't work.
Oh, for fuck's sakes!
Damn you, Rona.
But,
you still got the chest pubes though, right?
Well, yeah. There's no solving that problem without a weed whacker or a lot of duct tape and screaming.
I got a good electric one if you need to borrow it.
Nah, I'm good. I'm gonna maintain a healthy social distance from that. But anyway, my point being though, like Mike said, even at the local short track level, you got guys going out there and acting a fool, basically, tearing up their equipment and other people's equipment. And it doesn't take, but one freak incident for somebody to get hurt or killed by somebody doing that kind of thing. And it bothers me that such a focus is put on safety and racing from an engineering and design standpoint of the cars and the tracks, but we don't talk about the part that the drivers play in it.
The common sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to look at an incident where somebody was seriously injured or died and point the finger at the person who took the worst of it, because it's not politically correct, and it's not, it comes off as insensitive.
Maybe that's what needs to happen, though. I mean, if you take
And,
a look,
don't
if you
get me
take
wrong,
a
they
look,
shouldn't take the whole blame, obviously, and we should look at improving the cars from a safety perspective. But let's look at a comparison, to say football, for example, which is probably the best known sport on a national level that people can relate to the safety conversation. A lot of time is spent talking about making pads and helmets and stuff better, but they spend just as much time looking at the players and saying, hey, don't make these high risk moves, don't tackle with your head or horse collar somebody or something like that.
right? But here's the thing: you can relate to football all you want, but in the same breath, if you were to take NASCAR and tell these guys, hey, you're driving 200 miles an hour, the closing rate is this, you guys cannot block, you've taken away the game.
Have you, though? Because NASCAR is really the only top level motorsport that hasn't taken that option away. Every other major form of racing, whether it be sports cars, open wheel, whatever, aside from dirt track, which is its whole own different animal because of the lack of mirrors and spotters and things,
Right.
every major asphalt series has a one move rule. You can move once to the left or right, but once you've made that move, you're in that lane. You can't make another reactive move to try to cut the guy off, essentially.
Well, I think the way they look at NASCAR is you've got one move left or right. When you make that move, if you go to make the next move, sorry about your luck. Shit's going down.
Well, yeah, I mean
And you've seen that time and time again.
the drivers enforce it essentially.
Right. You've seen that time and time again. And everybody wanted boys have at it. And I'm the same way. I want these guys to race it out. But in the same breath, I don't want these guys to put themselves in stupid positions. And we've seen that all too often, even just this season so far. I mean, we've seen a lot of questionable blocking going on. And I think it's uncalled for. It's a desperate move, and I don't think it's a smart thing to do.
Well, here's an interesting idea.
Pressure.
Yeah. Here's an interesting idea, though, relating it to what I said about the dirt track stuff. What if they took the rearview mirrors away? Do you think that would make a difference?
No, you've still got the spotter in your ear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true with the big ass spoiler, quote unquote. Probably gonna
I
get
mean, yeah,
sued by Dale Jr. now, but with the big ass spoiler, they can't even use their rearview mirror half the time, so they
yeah,
are relying on the spotter.
that rearview mirror becomes basically null at the super speedway tracks. I mean,
Yeah.
that thing sticks up 4.5 feet.
And you
Uh,
have to have the spotter. I mean, as much as we'd like to maybe see how it would play out without them, when you're at those speeds, you got to have somebody be able to. Well, I mean, you could go with like a race receiver, and have race control say, "Hey, caution's out," that kind of thing.
yeah, but you've got to be able to know. Let's say not to bash on Timmy Hill or Landon Castle or any of those guys. You've got to have somebody in your ear telling you what moves you need to make to stay out of the way of everybody else because you're going to be down, you know, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour on a pack coming up on you.
Yeah,
And you can't be having that in everybody's ear.
yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. There really isn't an easy solution to it. I just hope that this crash with Newman was a wake up call to these guys, because there's no reason to be charging towards the wreck at full speed like that. The caution is out, the field is frozen, and maybe they should have thrown the caution earlier. But I mean that particular wreck happened so fast. I don't know that they could have.
I don't think there was really a whole lot Corey LaJoie could have done differently. He even said he was off the throttle. Your mind cannot react. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you're driving. I don't care how conditioned you are. You cannot react as fast as those guys need to, and crashes are inevitable, and crashes like that are inevitable. It's just, you know, and here we go back to placing blame. Had Ryan Newman not made that move, would it have happened? Probably not, but it did happen, and we need to take from that what we can in the blocking, the making the moves. You know, you go down to block some guy. Sorry, you're down there. That guy comes out on your outside. You're gonna have to let him go by, duck in, get a run on him.
Yeah, I mean that might really be the only feasible thing to do is to implement some kind of one move only rule like a lot of the other series have. It's unfortunate that it's so difficult to pass with this high downforce package that people feel like they have to block because once you get in that dirty air,
NASCAR's put themselves in that position.
Yeah, exactly.
With these downforce packages, you know, take the spoiler away, give them the power back, make them set the car up to drive the damn thing.
Yeah, get the car. I mean, the only way that they're really going to effectively negate some of that aero stuff is to get the car off of the ground, get the ground clearance higher so that they can't seal it off.
Yeah, make the car not in the track.
Yeah, because it really doesn't matter how much or how little downforce you have. Even when they went to the quote-unquote low downforce package, which was, of course, still much higher downforce than they've ever had in the past generations of cars, the fact that the front was still, and the splitter was still sealed off so much,
yeah,
it was still highly aero-dependent.
If you go back to some of the older races, you could actually watch those guys as they were going through, whether it be dog legs or chicanes or whatever. They were showing a race at an old race at Phoenix, and I was watching Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt battle it out. Dale Earnhardt's trying to stay on the lead lap. Rusty Wallace doesn't want him to. You could see the shock deflection in those cars. You could see those guys. I mean, they are wheeling those cars like crazy, and it's everything they could do to keep them under control. And they were right on the ragged edge of it. And today, it just doesn't seem like that's there. I mean, they're there to guide the car, and it doesn't tell me who's a good driver. It just tells me who's got the best shit.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's on. Well, I won't say an even playing field because obviously equipment is more of a divide now than it certainly has been. Maybe not ever, but at least since the early 2000s when the aero thing really started becoming huge. But yeah, I mean, I do think you can see the difference between the top tier drivers and those that aren't. But at the same time, it plays to a different skill set a lot of times with this current package versus those older cars. It tells you a lot more about somebody's racing ability, I guess, versus their pure driving ability. Because, like you said, it becomes a lot more of just holding a good wheel on the minute-to-minute or second-to-second aspect, but then that puts such a bigger emphasis on tactical thinking and planning your race out and planning your moves and stuff. So, I mean, there's still definitely good things to be had with the current iteration of NASCAR. But yeah, I think a lot of us, or most of us, would probably prefer to see those guys elbows up, sliding around, and all that good stuff.
Bring back bias ply tires.
Yeah, you and I have been on the same page on that for quite a while now.
Well, yeah, look at the ARCA cars, and they have great racing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Through the whole field.
All right, guys.
You don't have 3 different packs, so.
I think it's been we've covered a lot of different topics. We've gotten off on a lot of different tangents, but most of it's been good, and it's all been some good spirited racing discussions. I think we're getting towards the tail end of this thing. We're going to try to keep these shows somewhere around about the 1 hour mark. Before we go,
we blew this one up.
Well, not by too far. We had that little technical glitch in the middle that I'm going to have to edit around. But anyway, before we do sign off for the night, in future shows, we're going to look to maybe bring some guests in. We'd like to have kind of maybe like some local legend type people that we know or have interacted with in our racing careers, get them in here and get their opinion on some things.
Maybe a Clint Boyer or a Brad Keselowski, if you guys are listening.
Well, it's not like they have a whole lot better to do at the moment.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
we're not maybe quite aiming that high to begin with. But anybody who's listening,
For the stars.
if you feel like you have an interesting take on a racing related topic and you want to come on the show and chat with us, let me know. We'll get you set up. Or if you have any recommendations of local racing heroes or whatever that you'd like to hear from, let us know. Maybe forward us their relevant contact info or whatever, so we can get a hold of them, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, topics, questions. I mean, we're all for it. We got nothing better to do.
Pretty much.
I'm sitting here iRacing while I'm talking to you guys. So.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have. Do you guys have any closing thoughts or remarks before we sign off?
Yeah, if anybody does know Clint Boyer or Brad Keselowski or Alex Bowman or any of those guys, I will do my damnedest to see if I can get a hold of my buddy Brett Moffitt, and maybe we can get him on here and get chatting.
That would be pretty sweet. I mean,
I know he's on the mend right now.
He's probably on a lot of painkillers right now, so we might get some interesting takes on things.
It could be fun. But no, if any of you guys out there listening know any of those guys, send them our way. I'd be more than happy to have a chat with them.
I don't know if I want to let. I don't know if knowing how you feel about Brad Keselowski, if that would be a good idea from anybody's standpoint. But
I respect the majority of his thoughts and opinions. I'm gonna bite my tongue after that.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to shoot your ambitious goals in the foot before we even have a chance to.
But no, I think he's got some excellent points in everything he talks NASCAR.
Yeah.
I think he's a very well spoken, very well thought out, very intelligent person. There's just
except for going electric.
Well, we can all just forget that he said that.
We can forget he said that, but he's just talking about the inevitable.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
But realistically, you don't have to be a superstar, obviously, to get to get on our program. So, if you feel like you have something interesting to add, by all means, shoot us a message or something. Scott, any final remarks from you here?
Oh, not really. Just we're just three guys looking to shoot the shit and
three guys in a cup.
Oh God, definitely not.
If you can guess what the what TBD stands for, we'll give you a cookie. How about that?
And a John Ross Racing T-shirt.
One that neither.
Yeah, but it's going to be size small because that's all I have left.
And it doesn't matter who you are; you have to model it for us.
Yep, them's the rules. All right, well, thank you to all the hypothetical listeners that may or may not have stuck with us for this entire rambling and incoherent mess of racing-related bullshit.
All four of you.
Yep, you guys are the best. Couldn't do it without you. Even though we
now.
are most likely doing it without you. Until next time, gentlemen.
Next Monday.
Yep.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yep.
So it's not Wednesday then; it's Monday.
It is. Well, we record on Monday nights. The show will most likely go live sometime Tuesday. Oh, and of course, there's not a whole lot of time between this airing and when people will hear this and when it'll happen. But Wednesday night, we are doing an enduro on iRacing, 100 laps at Lernerville, with street stocks, Pro 2 light trucks, and Miatas. So that'll be interesting. That's open to the public. Feel free to jump in and wreck us and all that good stuff. And that's all I got.
Or just Mike.
That's all I got.
Don't wreck me yet. I just sent a message to Brett to see if we can get him on the show.
Nice. All right, guys. It's been fun. We'll do this again next week.
Oh, yeah, we'll be more prepared next time.
All right.
No, we won't.
Later.
See ya.